And welcome back to Think Global Do Justice. My name is Brandon Stiver. Great to be with you guys once again. Looking forward to this conversation. It's summer, a good time to talk about the beautiful creation. Living in the Puget Sound region, this is the reason why we remind ourselves why we live here is because it's so beautiful outside. But creation care has a huge piece as well when we talk about economic development and integral mission. So I'm looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today with a new friend that's doing important work. Before we do, I do want to give a shout out to our partners at the Accord Network. If you guys are wanting to connect with other people that are involved in international development work and come from a perspective of wanting to honor God and follow Jesus in everything that you do, no better spot than to connect with the Accord Network and the One Accord Conference, which is coming up in October. If you use the code GLOBAL, you'll get a discount on your tickets. So please come out to One Accord. It's going to be a good time. I'm excited to jump into this conversation today. On the show, I have Milmer Martinez Vergara, and he is with Plant with Purpose, VP of International Programs over there. Just a fantastic organization doing really important work. So Milmer, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Brandon, for having us.
Yeah, well, you are in France right now. You're a
Correct.
bit of a globetrotter. You guys are doing work all throughout the world in various ecosystems and communities, and I'm excited to jump in. Before we do, Milmer, I would love to just kind of hear what brought you into international development type of work. What's your
hmm
background? Yeah, how'd you end up here?
Yes. Yes. So as you said, I'm currently in France, but I was born in Colombia, and the headquarters, not headquarters, the hub office of Plan with Purpose is in San Diego. And basically, I'm a biologist, marine biologist. That's my background. So as you said, Puget Sound, immediately I think about orcas. And so I did my grad school in San Diego in genetics and dolphin genetics, marine biology. And then I worked with the government. I did a lot of my grad school at the government facilities in La Jolla, California. And I realized that in order for me to be able to do, and I always had a very social inkling, so meaning that I did the research, the biology, the ecology, the behavioral research, but I had always had to put the human into that equation, and it was kind of frowned upon in school. So I remember with church. So I always thought that, like, okay, how can you think about doing conservation, doing this type of wildlife management if you don't take into account the human and the ecosystem? That's basically it. So I started doing some for my grad research as I said, with government agencies, NOAA in La Jolla, and I realized very fast that there's no way that you can do any of this work have meaningful effects, especially in the global south, where there's a big of concentration of biodiversity, if you're not putting the human into the equation. So that's basically what it is. I did my grad school, and then I was going to church, and at that church, that it's the Mount Soledad Presbyterian Church in San Diego, that's where Plan with Purpose Floresta was born. So that's basically how I ended up. I realized that in order for me to have a tangible, measurable result in the areas where I wanted to work, I needed to include that. And the model of Plan with Purpose, at that moment, I saw the potential to really refine it, to be able to have that effect, to be able to have the effect in creation, that positive, but at the same time, address all the other issues that were keeping that from happening in the world. So that's basically how I started working at Plan with Purpose.
So were you with Plant with Purpose from the get-go then?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Okay, so how
yeah.
long has the org been around?
It's been no. I thought, the organization has been for 40 years, since 1984. They started in Dominican Republic, but I started volunteering with them at the church since 2001.
Okay,
And
okay.
then in 2007, I started working with them officially, well, at Plan with Purpose. So it's been around 20 years, but Plan with Purpose has been around for Floresta. Plan with Purpose has been around for about 40 years.
Okay. So when we talk about international development, if you were to survey, professionals throughout, they can be Christian or non-Christian, climate change is one of the foremost things that people say, well, this is a serious risk.
Mhm.
Right now, I think AI is kind of also kind of rising in terms of like those global concerns, what could cause a big issue. But climate change is always up there. And you guys, as a Christian organization, are tackling, that issue in a very unique way. Can you tell me just a little bit about what Plant with Purpose does, you guys' scope of work, programs, etc.?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, we do holistic work, meaning that we see poverty as multidimensional. We see poverty also as an expression of dysfunctional relationships between man and God, the environment, neighbors, and creation. So that's very much part of our collective consciousness and the mission. And our theory of change is designed to address it. So our theory of change has, or our work is divided into three areas: economic empowerment, environmental restoration, and spiritual renewal, spiritual development. And basically, as it relates to, so we see kind of like the problem. So when we think about our target groups that are rural farmers in conditions of poverty, then we think about, okay, in order for there to be a rural livelihood that thrives, it needs to take into account all those efforts, all those angles. So as it relates to specifically like climate change or any other of these threats, I remember even at the beginning, it was kind of difficult to use that term in the circles in which we moved. And for me as a scientist, I always just reduced the reality from a fact perspective. So I would just say our farmers, our participant farmers, our partner farmers are experiencing changing weather patterns, unreliable rain, and have to adjust their agricultural systems in order to be able to mitigate this problem. So for example, one way in which we do that in practical terms is that there's a transition of the use of the land. So instead of you being a monoculture, short cycle crops, we want perennial crops, tree crops that are more with a high native component, that are more adapted to those conditions, and that are more resilient to those conditions. So that's one part. That's let's say that the biological and agricultural part of it. So a system, agroforestry system, multi-level, multi-species, have the ability to generate income at different levels, but at the same time is helping percolate water. It's helping produce rain, and it's reducing the workload for people. So that's as I said, that's from the community organization and from the agricultural perspective, but very much the spiritual component and the spiritual of economy of business is very much ingrained of that.
Yeah.
But again, it wouldn't function in one way or another. I don't know if that
Yeah. No, that speaks to
answers.
it. I'm kind of curious. So you come from Colombia originally, and then lived in SoCal for a while. One of the things you just kind of said was in the circles that we run in, and as a Christian organization, I assume that means maybe probably a lot of evangelical circles and so forth. And climate change
Correct.
might be a word that people are less receptive to. So you almost are presenting it with other terms that are technically accurate and explanatory. But why do you think there is kind of an apprehension in certain regards, potentially among Christians, to consider this global issue?
Yeah, what I can tell you is that it was strange to me because in Colombia, that I went to a holistic church, evangelical church, that was never mutually exclusive. You loving God, you loving nature was not mutually exclusive. and not from a perspective of exploiting it, but from a perspective of living it in harmony. So even the secular messages, and not just in Colombia, in other places where we work, the messaging and the awareness of our role being evangelical or not evangelical, Christian, non-Christian, in taking care of creation as it relates to our livelihoods. There was never that dichotomy. So it was strange to me when I came to the U.S. and to experience that. And the little that I know, I'm no scholar. I can tell you just from what I know from talking to people, because I like to talk to people. And I think there was this kind of a perspective that there was a hyper focus of using nature, of using biodiversity, of exploiting it, and as opposed to manage it, not even to control it, to manage it, to steward it. So there was almost like it was intertwined. And as I said, I don't want to, I want to be careful, right? But that was my experience. I almost felt, I remember going to school with people that were Christian, and they felt like they felt torn, even talking about this. And as we talked about it, it was, so I don't know. I think it comes from a place where there's a legacy of theology, there's a legacy of the way how we've understood that, but I also think that there's a relationship with not knowing, with not seeing things the first hand. I mean, it's easy for someone from any culture to go to any places where we work and to experience that, to hear from a farmer that has never heard well, not our farmers, but other farmers that have never heard about creation care, and they're telling you about the changing patterns, how they're unreliable, how things, what they grew before they can't, how they now are dependent on buying these special seeds and things like that. So, as I said, it's that was my experience. There was a false dichotomy.
Yeah, that false dichotomy, I see it as well. Some of it might get into kind of like if we think about the creation mandate from the book of Genesis, and God says to have dominion, that's not a term that we use in everyday life. Yeah. And you could almost kind of think like, oh, have dominion, like you almost kind of think dominate, like, oh, okay, and you use the word exploit, which absolutely happens, and it leads to so many of the large ecological issues that we have is because of the exploitation, right? The domination of that space.
Exploitation.
But if you really kind of think about it from what's the anthropology of Genesis, God is having man and woman, in the garden to co-reign with him. And if we think about what does it look like to be a king or a queen, a good king or a queen is going to take care of their subjects, so to speak. And maybe we are, some people would push back on this and it would be an interesting conversation, but like if humans were the pinnacle of God's creation, that really only means that we should be taking care of the rest of creation. And I think too often we probably are not thinking about it from a stewardship lens, like you mentioned, or from a co-reigning with God lens.
Look, I remember that. As I said, I'm not a Bible scholar. I love God. I love Jesus. I really support myself on the Holy Spirit. But it was very obvious to me reading Genesis, like there's already, without going too deep, a message of sustainability, because the Bible was not for you to read it, but was also for your children to read it, for the children of the children to read it. So the idea that our generation would be taking away that is written, that for them to read in the future, is already a message of stewardship and sustainability. How can you take that away? So how did our ancestors were able to see a dodo and we can't, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. So as I said, you don't have to go that far to ask questions about it. Yeah. And Yeah.
How do you guys, I would love to kind of hear what this looks like for you guys programmatically. So Plant with Purpose has been around for 40 years. You guys take that creation mandate, that stewardship mandate very seriously, and you
Hmm.
guys have built a very strong apparatus
Yeah.
around, supporting ecosystems, rebuilding ecosystems in partnership with local communities. Tell me a little bit about just kind of the programs that you guys run and what the outcomes of those are.
Yeah. Um, so specifically as it relates to creation care, I mean, as I said, if we see poverty, not just from a socioeconomic status, but we see poverty as a dysfunctional relationships and what we see as an expression of that, as seeing symptoms, then our focus, for example, as we're talking about creation care, is to present, to show a different perspective. It's not to tell, it's not to coerce, it's not to threat, it's not to threaten, it's not to make, it's not to fear monger, right? So it's more about um, creating the opportunity to think about this and to have a dialogue around it. And and we work with all kinds of people. We work with all different faiths in the field. So from that perspective, when you start thinking about how you have a responsibility within the ecosystem, so that not only, even if you don't value biodiversity intrinsically, let's say that you value it from our utilitarian perspective, you there is already the opportunity for you to manage it in a way that it's useful to you, sustainable in the future, right? So even if you don't get into the stewardship part, but it's the part about, in order for you to have a livelihood here as a farmer, in order for you to enjoy, to keep enjoying, and to not have to work so hard every day, we need to see creation and nature in a very different way than what you're doing. So that's very much part of the message. The other part is, as we work, we can work with churches, we can work with schools, we can work with other institutions. So depending on that, the message of creation care is always there. I mean, more overtly with churches, that way they see that they have a function in that. As I said, and it's not a difficult connection to make. It's not like it's hard. No. So that's the part that has to do with creation care and the let's say that the spiritual development component. But then, as it relates to what we do, as I said, because we see everything from a perspective of broken relationships or dysfunctional relationships, we want to mediate that. I think that's one of the things that is very important of our model, that I've really been very industrious about making sure, is the idea that our staff, us ourselves, need to model what we're trying to facilitate. So first of all, we don't see ourselves as experts. We see ourselves as practitioners. We see ourselves as facilitators. We see ourselves as stewards too. So that in itself, you as a practitioner, as a member of the team, if you start breathing that and understanding that changes the way how you relate to everyone. So for example, when I hired an Oxford student to do an assessment of what was the most influential or impactful intervention, and from the spiritual development component, spiritual renewal component, the result wouldn't surprise you, but it was how the staff treated people, right? So I mean, I can talk about all the model and the minutes and the theory of change and everything else, but I think that if I don't have a lot of time that I don't want to abuse of them, I would say that that's one of the biggest things. The thing is that we come to a place, we assess if we can be successful, because the way how we work it requires your agency, requires some sense of agency, requires some will of you to move out of your situation, because or else we wouldn't be very good stewards of our resources. So we have something called community readiness assessment, where we work with the communities in watersheds to make sure that they are willing to do it, that they understand that it's. I've even done calculations. You need to invest 10, 12 hours a week in your 1 hectare land in order for this to work for at least a year, for at least 2 years, right? So that's a big component of what we do. And the other part is what I said. We need to breathe that. We need to be these things. And the paycheck, though we are we work really hard to make sure that everyone gets paid a living wage, and we do all the proper things, the best practices, that will only take you halfway there, right? Because this work requires your heart and that of your family, and right, and if anything, we have to be careful of not overworking us and ourselves and things like that. But as I said, that those two elements are very key to the work that we do. The other big part that I think that is very important of the model is, and I can maybe you can tell me what you want me to get more into, but the other part is measuring, is seeing the measuring, the evaluation, the learning, the research, the innovation as part of programming. So the way I explain to people is that me as a biologist, there's no system in biology that exists without a regulatory feedback system. So when I think about programming, I don't think of monitoring, evaluation, and innovation as the afterthought. It goes in between. It's part of the program. You need it in order to make it better, to make it iterative, especially as you engage in this multi-year projects with the community. So that's another component. And just one last one. The other part is the watershed model. So we understand that there's a cohesion within a watershed that is defined by hydrology, but there's ecology cohesion, there's cultural cohesion, there's trade cohesion, there's language cohesion. So by working a territorial 150 square kilometers to 250 square kilometers with about 3,000 families, where we can make about 100 groups in each area. So if we concentrate the work in those areas, then we can achieve critical mass. So you have visibility, you have buzz, you have excitement. So that's another integral part of the work that we do.
When you're engaging a community like that, a few thousand people in a given area, what's their main draw? Are they looking at this like this is going to enhance our farming, or are they looking at it like this is going to affect the rain system? Like when you reach out, and like you say, you guys really emphasize that community buy-in. That if they're not invested, it's not going to work. That's pretty much fundamental. But what are they drawn to?
They're drawn to basically, in their words, to improving their lives. But that means when you get into the details, that means improving their agricultural yields, having water, having improved income. So one thing is you're producing, but if you're producing things that you don't sell, then right. So you have to work on that. So improved income, and by that I mean increasing, but also less variable. So less. Here's the harvest, and then no harvest, right? So that I think those are the things that draw people. The other component that draws people, that is kind of that for me is a vehicle and a pedagogical tool, is saving and loan groups, and the idea of being able to increase their savings and their incomes by loaning each other is something that is also very attractive to farmers. But in general, they want to improve their lives. They want to have better yields. They want to have better incomes. They want to be able to pay their children to school. So that's what people are focused on. And then they realize that through the process, they can do much more than that. But that's the draw. That's
interesting. So when you guys are, working in a community, you guys are also doing microfinance? Or that's just kind of like supplemental, or is that pretty intrinsic to kind of how you guys go about it?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I call it. We actually call them purpose groups, or groups for local development. And as I said, for me, much more than providing a financial service to the community. So we don't do microfinance. We used to do microfinance, but it was basically putting people in debt, right? So what we do is that we facilitate the village and saving loans methodology, so that there's a sense of self-management, self-choosing, and this pedagogical tool that builds agency, group decision making, organization, respect. So that specific methodology, we use it as a vehicle for cultural change, right? So yes, we do. There are interventions related to financial services and in microinsurance, but it's much more than that. People stay together because they suddenly are more united. People stay together because they can do business together. So yeah, it's part of what we do.
Yeah. Often when we're engaging in a community, obviously it's easy to have a romantic view of, a given community and just kind of assume like, oh, no, these people are just, oppressed or whatever. And often that may be the case, but often we're also coming up against mentalities, views that are inaccurate and actually kind of need to be potentially contradicted in a way. I'm thinking, even as we talk about this, the environmental piece with the economy piece, I'm reminded of Kevin Bale's book, Blood and Earth, where he's talking about how ecocide is very tightly linked with modern slavery. And you have these exploitative practices, whether it's shrimp farming in Southeast Asia or gold mining in West Africa or what have you, where the exploitation of people is also leading to ecological degradation. We can think of certain communities where one of the best ways to make a buck is to make coal, right? Yeah. And that might be... that might help somebody economically, but it's also not good for the environment, right? So how do you guys kind of interact in that space if you're coming into a community and you realize some of these practices are actually counterproductive towards improving the ecosystem? Correct.
That what you just said, Brandon, that's exactly, the things that we work with, that we encounter. I would say that what explains that is when you live in conditions of poverty, your horizon is very close. You can only think about what you know in the short term. It's like, okay, I need to eat tomorrow. I need to be able to do that. As I said at the beginning, there's a transition in agricultural systems. Why? Because you can produce red beans in 3 months, right? You can produce corn, I think is 9 months, I forget. But actually, no, it's more like a year. But what I'm saying is that perspective of hopelessness, of fatalistic, where things are not going to change, of like, I have to stick in Haiti. This is a real story in Haiti, for example. People knowing that their practices were making the land just go away because it was like extensive tilling, right? And they knew it, and they would say the only thing that we get every year that grows is the stones, because we just wash and more stones would show. But even in that regard, and them understanding that cutting a tree is not good for them, they're not going to have shade for their animals, they still do it. So it's like, it's not like they don't have a sense. It's like it's very hard in those conditions to see anything beyond. So when we go to a place and we start having these conversations where it's less, I guess it's contradicting, but it's more about, let me show you, let me tell you, let's make a plan, let's make the numbers. So you tell me that you spend this money doing red beans, so at the end you're actually losing money. How much, right? So there's some efforts of showing, demonstrating. We use experiments for people to try things out. There's always the 5%, the 3% that are entrepreneurial and will want to try. We always rely on those people to show the others. But the reality is that it's easier for us to see longer horizons because we have indefinite contracts with our companies that we work with, because we've had always water coming through the tap, because we write things like that. So that's one of the things that we need to work together. And the other part of that is the hope. As I said, is the fact that with the hope that the faith brings you, with believing that if you try this can, so that's something else that we really support ourselves on. But that's absolutely true. It's very hard, and again, I've never approached a situation where I feel better than the people, because again, that's all you see. You don't see beyond that. So basically, just working together to push the horizon further and further and further. Once they start seeing that way, it's like they start saying, oh, well, saving is like growing a tree. You add a little bit every day, that you add water, and then in 3 years you have a fruit. And you actually, if you do the numbers, there's a calculator. If you do the numbers, it's like it's actually more productive than that. And now, if I have the saving group, I can actually. So again, it really builds up. And then when the machine is clicking, then it's like duh, right?
Yeah.
And then one of the most beautiful things that I like after having these discussions that people their lives changing and doing agroforestry, multi-level agroforestry, people, before I didn't have time to sit down, and now I notice that there's birds. Simple as that. And in many countries I hear the same thing. Before I felt alone, before I didn't have time to sit down and to admire, and now the birds are coming or the animals are coming. So, but so it's easy to be it's easy to not understand what people go through. Yeah.
Well, I'm also picking up on, community is not monolithic. So even if we talk about positive deviance, you're going to have those people that are oriented and you can work with to kind of show the way of what would just be a better way. And I love that. When you are working with a community, what's kind of the average timeline? You talk about the horizon is very short for somebody who's living in abject poverty. So it makes sense. I'm just going to chop this tree down, turn it into charcoal and, whatever. What's kind of, how do you kind of expand that horizon? Are we talking like once you're engaged in a community and they start adapting and adopting new practices, are we talking they see changes within a year, 2 years, 3 years, 20 years? What does that look like?
So timeline. So in terms of timeline, we are currently adjusting timelines right now. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning we're graduating. That's like the version 1.0 or 1.2, you want to call it, where we used to be in an area for a long time, 15 years even, but without kind of like an optimized way of using our time. So that we're completely iterating and phasing out. And now we're running experiments where we check the movement in 3 years, 6 years, 9 years. We're doing experiments like that in Congo and DRC and Burundi. But the reality is that so let's say you have there's so many things I can say. So let's say in terms of positive deviance, when you start in a country, that might be the way that you start in the first watershed. But the reality is that once people start seeing of the neighboring watersheds, because they're used as a comparison group for the difference in difference study or impact evaluation, then it's not just one that in the next watershed, you don't have a positive deviance. Suddenly you have 80 people wanting to do a line to start working with us, because suddenly
you have a proof of concept now.
Exactly, we have proof of concept. Now, in terms of the timelines, it varies. In a place like the DRC, where people eat cassava leaves, for example, have 2 meals a day, including that, the idea of having a 7-year timeline, it's almost irresponsible, because you can have significant change in nutrition, in business, in agency in 4 years. So what we're seeing right now is that perhaps in places like that, like Congo, some places in Burundi, we don't need to get there for a long time. When we talk about planting trees in areas like the DRC, is different from the multi-level, multi-species Dominican Republic, where we started a system that basically you measure biodiversity and is comparable to riparian areas that are not intervened. But in the places like Congo, where you plant trees, basically they didn't plant trees before, where you plant trees marking their boundaries, you put fruit trees, and you put trees that grow fast so you can use them for doing charcoal, and you put trees that actually you can cut and keep growing and they grow again, then suddenly 3 years is okay. I mean, you can plant an acacia, a type of acacia, in 2 years you can cut it and you can use it for construction. The same thing with eucalyptus. So you can do those kind of things. So it's more of a tree, it's more of a trees as crops, but in the case of, for example, Dominican Republic, Tanzania, and Thailand, where you actually have the culture and the ecology to be able to do this, we start, and even if you do grafted trees, the first time you get the first small crop is at 3.5 years. So we have to pass that barrier because it is at that moment where their income just jumps. So when you first arrive to a country, it takes longer, of course, proof of concept. But then after, because you're using the contiguous areas that are homogeneous to where you're working already to make comparisons and they see what's happening, then it's different. So the idea is to optimize these processes. But from a perspective of delivery of program, you need at least 3.5 years. From a perspective of you seeing the change drastically, or seeing the change for the first time, is 3.5, 4 years if you plant trees in the first year.
Yeah.
But if you wait 7 years, where you transition all your hectare of land to all agroforestry, you see a peak in production in year 6, year 7. So that dictates a little bit of that work.
Yeah.
So that's how we work with the timelines.
Yeah, and from looking at your guys' website, and I'll just encourage our listeners, plantwithpurpose.org. It's linked in our show notes. You guys have planted over 92 million trees. That's incredible. And it underscores, as your website says, we've planted these trees, and it's cutting poverty in half. Can you just kind of illuminate that a little bit more? I mean, we've been talking about it already, but I'm a sports fan. Do you like sports? Are you a sports fan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you rooting for Colombia or France, or who do you got in the World Cup?
I'm rooting for the U.S., Colombia, France.
Okay, all right.
So
I'm always
yeah. I love it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But being a sports fan myself, I've been drawn as a Laker fan. Whenever I see the Clippers in hot water, it makes me giggle a little bit. And they had this whole thing with aspiration. I don't know if you saw this, but it was basically this. It was people can go listen to Pablo Torre if they want to learn more. But basically, it was an organization, aspiration, that was working with the Clippers, but it was a total fraud. The guy just went to prison for fraud, and they were basically saying, like, give us this money and then we'll go plant trees, and they were like buying carbon credits and kind of doing this whole thing. And it seemed nice, and it seemed like a good environmental bank or whatever you wanted to call it. But then I look at an organization like you guys, where you guys have been doing it for decades now, and you're doing it as a nonprofit, and you're doing it targeting not just caring for creation, but also to address poverty in these communities. Can you just kind of illuminate that a little bit more? Like, why is creation care and poverty so intertwined?
Yes. So first of all, as you said, people that have done this kind of cons with trees have damaged a lot of the work that we do. It puts us in a situation where it's almost like defensive. But also, much more than planting 90 million trees is that, think about that, much more than the number. Each tree is a tree valued differently by the person that planted. First of all, we didn't plant it. The farmer planted it because they recognized, or they hoped for their life to change, right? They saw someone planting it, get fruit, more money, all these things. So that's what that tree means. It means a change in the value of that tree, right? So, and also just something to point out. It's super significant in that sense. It's a tree that is loved, basically, not just like it's laid in the ground. The other component of that is that if you are, so again, forestry tree, native species, naturalized tree, things like that. I mean, all these trees have values, bring value to the farm. So, I mean, one of the things that, as I said, that we do is the transition to a multi-level agroforestry, or I call it regenerative agroforestry. And at the beginning, you want to plant trees that give income to people. So, for example, our organization in the border regions with Haiti and the Dominican Republic, with the partners, we reactivated the production of organic avocado, like single-handedly, and we averted a second coffee problem in the region because of that, because the way how we work, the work with the community. But again, I was just trying to forget the point that I was trying to make. Yes, the system. So the system, there might be species that fit specific goals. This one is going to give me income during this time of the year. This one is going to give me food because I like this food, but it's too expensive. This one is I'm going to use for fuel because it grows fast and it's going to be in this area and doesn't interfere with the growth of other species. But this one, and this is the epitome of where I want to go. And this is the testimony of people in Burundi and also in Dominican Republic. And it's like, I plant this tree so that the birds have something to eat. So again, it's not something that you achieve. I mean, I cannot expect, like I did this, I cannot expect someone that uses a gill net and kills dolphins by bycatch to stop doing it because they don't have an alternative. That's right. So we need to work together on an alternative. So, but when someone's belly is full, where suddenly they feel like they're content, suddenly they start seeing like this life differently. So that's what I was saying about the person that suddenly he's eating, he has less variable income, he has time to stop, he has time to admire and contemplate, and then suddenly I'm going to do this because of that.
Yeah.
So that's a progression into how a tree can be initially planted for income, for the hope of this being different, of my life being different. But then after, it evolves into the opportunity. My belly's full. I feel content. Now I do. And we see that over and over. And those people that acquire that suddenly make that path and that thought process faster for the new people that come behind.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's so many things to do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'll just acknowledge to our listeners, we are recording this in June, and it is end of school. So if you hear people clapping in the background from Milmer, it's also because there's a school next door, and I got kids on the trampoline outside. So we'll just acknowledge that.
Thank you.
But one of the things that I am passionate about, it was a big piece of what we were doing when I lived in Tanzania, which is one of your guys' countries of impact as well. Was working with local churches. Mm-hmm. When I go through your guys' website, that's a big part of your guys' model as well, is that collaboration with local churches. Yeah. How do you guys kind of engage the church in these different contexts in which you guys find yourselves?
Yeah. So first of all, we see it indispensable to be able to work with local institutions that are already there in order for them we don't conceive the work without involving everyone in it. Now, everyone is invited. Not everyone is willing to do it, right? At the beginning, at least. So the way that we do with churches is that there's already a message that we have specifically about creation care with churches. So we have a creation care curriculum where we have a spiritual renewal curriculum. So at the beginning, we can talk with leaders or sometimes just with the farmers that are part of the church, and then they bring us to church, right? So we've seen that, but it manifests itself in many different ways. There's also the church have leaders in the community. So usually the pastor is also a leader in other areas. So as I said, the work that we do requires the work with local institutions. And those are local authorities, local indigenous leadership systems, schools, associations. So it is part of a strategy that makes it effective, but because of our faith, because of how we think that the church can do more and can see things from another perspective of what they're usually just doing, then we engage the church in this way. We invite the church to be part of it, and it's normal for a church to have a nursery. It's normal for a church to have a saving and loan groups. It's normal for a church to learn about creation care, to hear from our staff, or to be trained by our staff in this area. So that's one of the ways that we work. And also, it's not just because it makes the work more effective, but it makes the work sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're thinking about that, the changes that we catalyze will not stay there unless there's permanence. And the church and the people and the schools and the children give permanence to that. So it is part of the sustainability strategy to work with churches, and there's no other way.
Yeah, no other way. And the church is the body of Christ and the hope of the world. Last question. And when we think about climate change, when we think about just the global environment, there is a lot of doomsaying.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're heading towards some calamity, some global calamity. You certainly see this uh, just kind of in international spaces, Greta Thunberg and, just kind of that. And she does important work. I'm not like throwing
Yeah,
anyone
yeah.
under the bus, but, just kind of that, like, almost kind of like we're angry, we're doomsaying, we're whatever. Maybe a lot of that is warranted,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also called to be people of hope. And as a part of a organization that has been doing work for the last 40 years, I almost kind of want to ask, is there hope? Or
Yeah,
or
I understand.
what do you hope for? What do you see as a positive
Yeah,
thing coming down the pipe when we think about our environment and our climate?
yeah. I mean, inside our international programs and Merlin team, we have a slogan that is "You sow, was it sow purpose and harvest joy." So harvest joy and hope. It's impossible for me uh, to not consider the possibility that we can take us in the direction that God wants us to take it. Um, if there's something as a scientist and a biologist that I've learned is that nature is amazing. It has an ability to rebound, to restore. Yes, it's true. Yes, the models make it very difficult to believe that. But from a perspective of mystery, from a perspective that I'm sorry, I studied a lot. I am amazed and baffled by what I see in nature and by what happens in nature, what we discover. So for me, it's impossible to not consider what we still haven't discovered as a possibility that would support the positive changes that we're trying to do. The key here for me is to keep working, to have productive conversations, to not waste energy and community, not waste community and relationships in things that divide us. So, but just simply doing the work, keep praying, and have a hope. I have hope. I do have hope. It's impossible for me. I was not built that way, and again, there's enough uncertainty and mystery in the world and in God that for me, I'm not going to give up, and we're
Yeah,
not giving up. And the people that we work in the communities, they don't want to give up. I mean, maybe when
yeah.
we come, but after they don't.
What would be one thing that you would, somebody has a heart for justice, somebody has a heart for, including ecological justice, but maybe they're not working with plant with a purpose. They're not a farmer in East Africa. Um, what would be one thing that you would recommend that person do?
I think that there's a lot of power that we have, just because sometimes we forget that we use direct we everything that we use is part of nature, right? Everything that you look around, your computer, your food. But food is a very specific way in which you can vote. I like there's the my organic co-op here has this slogan in the bags. It says you vote 3 times a day. And I do think that just simply having a little bit more curiosity about what you're eating, where you buy it, and all these things, I think that it's a way in which you can actually make a big difference. And we've seen
Yeah.
it. We've seen it. I've seen it. I remember people looked at me weird when I would go to Trader Joe's with my reusable basket. They thought I was a weirdo, and now everyone is using a reusable basket, right, or a bag. So I do think that food systems and the way how they relate to the natural ecosystem is the way to do it. I mean, if you think about it, that's a part of what we do. We
Yeah.
see animals. We see animals coming back to plots that people harvest, and they stay there and they live there. They use it as part of their habitat because people respect them. They see them differently, and because it's in any way it's altering their production or is very little at changing that production. So I think that that's something that I would say to 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 be curious, to ask
Yeah.
yourself about what you eat, where you buy it, all these different things. I think that's a good way to think about it, and it's very much
Yeah.
related to the work that we do in the field.
Amen. No, that's so good. Milmer, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I learned a lot. I'm just an admirer of Plant with Purpose and the work that you guys do. I'll again direct our audience to the show notes where you can just click on and learn more about their website, plantwithpurpose.org. And yeah, incredible work. Thank you so much for joining us, Milmer.
No, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it. And for anyone that is listening, just read if you want to know something. If there's something that you heard that it caused you curiosity, give me a call. Call the organization. We're always open. We feel that it's a part. We see ourselves as part of the community. So please let us know what we can do, or if you have any other questions. So thank you, Brandon.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And for our listeners, may Almighty God, who created us in his own image, grant us grace to fearlessly contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression, and that we may reverently use our freedom and employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations, to the glory of God's holy name through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And we will catch you guys on the next episode of Think Global, Do Justice.
Brandon.